how do you explain morality on materialism? And I'm really curious if you kind of follow why that's a problem for me. But help that make sense to me.
Of course. I mean, I think you're right to point out that ethics is a difficult thing to ground on materialism, but there are a few things to say. The first is that I'm not a moral realist. So if you're looking for me to justify the existence of good and bad as sort of real properties of the universe, you're not going to find it, because I don't believe that they exist. There are materialists who do think that objective ethics exists, and what I think we can learn from them is that I'm not sure how much the existence of God solves the problems that people find with grounding ethics on materialism. And really, it depends on exactly what you mean by ethics. Because if ethics is something like a series of rules, if you're like an objective list theorist, and you think that there are sort of this, essentially crudely, like a list of things which are right and wrong, and that's just true facts, that is something that could be like dictated by some kind of authoritative creator. It's not something that can exist on materialism. That's fine. If you're like a divine command theorist, things that are moral are just moral because God says so. That's like why they're right and wrong. Then, of course, you can only do that with God. Of course, you run into some issues with that. As to, I mean, famously the Euthyphro dilemma, although I think that's a bit of a dead horse, though we could discuss it if you want. But I'm
curious, do you think it's a dead horse in the sense that it's been debunked by theists, or do you think it's a dead horse because it hasn't?
It depends on the theist. I think that it still poses a very important question, but really it is a question. It's not something that can be precisely debunked, because the question is asked, is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? And strictly speaking, there's nothing wrong with just saying, well, it's good because God commands it. And people will say, oh, but that makes it arbitrary. It's like, maybe, but it would still just be true. You know, it would still, like, on my view, that would just make it right and wrong, and that might sort of rub people up the wrong way. But like, there's nothing stopping you from taking that line. The most common Christian response is to say that God just is good. It's like a third option. You know, it's not like God commands it because it's good, or it's good because he commands it, but God just is good, and his commands necessarily flow from that nature. But to me, that kind of feels like a version of saying that God commands it because it's good. It's just that he is good, and that's why he commands those things, because they're just in accordance with that. But like I say, like, you can just take that option, and that's fine. So
so that checks out for you. I mean, you at least understand that sort of third option.
Yeah,
response,
of course.
But like goodness and God are inextricably connected, so that to talk about the one without the other is incoherent. Like that, you get that.
That's true, but then I think you have to offer an analysis of exactly what you mean by saying that goodness and God are the same thing, which can get a bit sort of dicey and complicated. But yeah, I mean, like, if there is just such thing as the good that just exists, then fine. The problem with this conversation and speaking like abstractly or broadly about this is it really depends on what the individual person's view of morality is. So I don't know what you mean when you say morality or good and bad. I don't know what's coming to mind. Like, because good could be, acting in accordance with God's will. It could be approximating God's nature. It could be acting in accordance with the commands that God gives. It could be like all kinds of different things.
Are you familiar with C.S. Lewis's DOW that he talks about at the end of The Abolition of Man?
His DOW? No, I haven't read The Abolition of Man, actually.
Oh my goodness, you have to read it.
No spoilers.
You're gonna love it.
Okay,
you're gonna love it. I won't spoil it, but he basically, this is sort of him looking, in his scholarly work of mythology and culture, and trying to assess, the human condition in light of that research, and he comes up with this idea that he calls the DAO, TAO, which is basically his way of trying to talk about universal objective morality apart from religiously cloaked language. But that would be his answer to your question. Is it's not my opinion. It's the things that humans have understood to be truly good and evil, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, if you say good and evil are the things that humans have understood to be truly good and evil, that I struggle to know what you mean there. It seems a bit like a circular definition because the term is in the definition. So I don't know exactly what you mean by... But importantly, good, like G.E. Moore famously described good as sui generis, as something which is totally unique and can't be defined. He said it's like yellow. It's like impossible to define yellow without just pointing to examples of things that are yellow. And so maybe something like that is going on here, where like you can't exactly define what good is, but you just know that there are things that are good and bad, and that tells you that there is something called good. You just can't give a strict definition of it.
Well, like the quote that you always give of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. If this is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. It could be something like that, right?
Right.
The problem is that if we start getting into that territory of like, oh, I kind of find it impossible to define, but I just know that there are things that are good and bad. It's like, it starts to sound almost a little bit brute facty again, in a way that an atheist is able to use, to do. They can do the same thing. I mean, like...
So do you believe in objective, I guess... I want to know your view. Like, do you believe in objective moral? You said you're not a moral realist.
That's right.
So does that mean you don't believe in any, that anything is actually ultimately good or bad?
That's right, with a caveat, which is that, and again, a throat clearing that I'm agnostic to varying degrees, and so I could be totally wrong about this, but broadly speaking, I'm an emotivist, which is a theory of ethics, but more than that, it's really a theory of language. It tries to offer an account of what people mean when they say something is good or bad. And it characterizes these statements as expressions of emotion. So that when someone says murder is good, they're expressing some kind of contentment towards murder. When they say murder is bad, they're expressing some kind of discontent towards it. That means that when you say, do I think that there are things that are good? It's like, because I understand the language emotively, I can say, yeah, I think that this is good and this is bad. But objectively, no. Like, it would be misleading. But it would also be misleading to say that I'm like a subjectivist. I'm literally thinking that these statements are just expressions of emotions. It's kind of hard to explain briefly. But
well, can I ask it just to help the audience
sure.
track with us? Because I've been very aware coming into this conversation that you can lose a lot of people when you get too technical or parlancy or whatever. Mm-hmm. So let me put it this way. What's the difference between Jack the Ripper and a surgeon if there is no value, if it's just the objective fact of what took place?
For the emotivist, it would be the emotional reaction that you have to either of them.
And the you in that sentence is Alex O'Connor.
Yes, although the emotivist kind of thinks that that's what everyone is doing, even if they don't realize it. But yes. So
if I have a totally different emotional response to that, then for me, let's say, for example, let's say that you emotionally believe that slavery is good. Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to convince you otherwise and say, Alex, no, come off the cliff, steer clear. Yep. Now, what resources do I have to help you not do this thing and join the KKK or whatever the case might be?
It's a great question, and it's got, I think, some really interesting ways to answer it. Like, the way that you've asked it specifically does allow me to answer you in a way that might satisfy the question, but to really steelman what I think you're saying, like the strongest version of this is to say that if there is genuinely just an irresolvable conflict in emotive state towards two things, then there is nothing you can do to say that somebody is right or wrong, because emotional states can't be right or wrong. The thing about emotivism is it's a form of ethical theory known as non-cognitivism. In ethics, if you're a cognitivist about ethics, it means that you think that moral statements can be true or false. If you're a non-cognitivist, it means that you don't think they can be true or false. Not subjectively, not objectively, they just can't be true or false. Take the statement, go over there. If I said to you, go over there, like a command, is that true or false? It's not that you just don't know if it's true or false. It's neither. It can't be either. It's not the kind of statement that can be true or false. So for the emotivist, when you say, like, murder is wrong, famously, it's like going boo murder, or like writing the word murder with an angry face emoji next to it. It's not the kind of thing that can be true or false. So the problem with that is of course that if I say murder is good and you say murder is bad, like how can we resolve that, right? The thing is that when take the slavery example, right? When somebody says like slavery is good, I don't think that they are having, even as a motivist, I don't think they're having like a surface level emotive reaction to slavery itself. I think that they've got some kind of emotive state buried down within them, and they've got a bunch of factual claims built up on top of it. So, for example, I used to have this conversation all the time when talking about veganism, because I used to be a vegan and I used to convince people to be vegans. And they would say to me what you've just said. They've said, you're a moral emotivist. You think that you don't like the killing of animals, and I do. Like, how can you say that I'm wrong? And I would say, okay, well, the problem is that I'll find an emotive statement that we do both share. So, for example, do you think that it's wrong to unnecessarily inflict suffering upon animals? And I'll go, yeah. Okay, we agree. Now, I think that's just an emotive expression, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that we both have that emotive expression. Then what I'll do is I'll move purely into the factual realm. I'll say, okay, is it necessary to eat animal products? No. Does eating animal products cause harm to animals? Yes. Therefore, eating animal products causes unnecessary harm to animals? Yes. This is all just factual, no moral statements or anything. But then you take this original emotive thing that you got them to agree with, that unnecessary suffering of animals is wrong, and you prove that this statement of like eating meat being wrong is in accordance with that emotive statement. And that's the conversation that you have. So you have a dispute about whether the surface level moral claim, like slavery is wrong, eating animal products is wrong, whatever, you have a conversation about whether that actually accords with their most fundamental emotive value. And even as an ethical emotive... Yeah, sorry, I've been banging on. You go ahead.
No. So this is my problem with that, is, in fact, a couple days ago, I heard someone starting a rumor that you were working on a petition to bring the KKK to the UK. And I thought, there's no way. But then I realized that if enough people agreed with the emotional response that, slavery is good, if you get that buy-in at the baseline level, then you magically transform what all of our intuitions are saying is bad into something that's good based on what you just laid out, which I have a big problem with.
Okay. For the record, of course, you're making a point.
Yes. This is not real. This is not real, people. Hopefully everyone knows that.
I get what you're saying, but I'm interested into what you mean by this. You said this intuition that we all share.
Well, I'm saying, okay, well, let's just focus on like the logic of what you laid out within veganism and applying that to this topic. It's almost the question of like how many people makes a culture, or how much buy-in do you need in order to justify something or to transform it into something that was priorly considered to be immoral, and now it has been magically turned into something moral based on that buy-in. That's basically the question.
Yeah, I get you. And by the way, I do just want to sort of accept the criticism at face value, which is that as an ethical emotivist, where there are genuinely, like if we just stipulate that there is a genuinely irresolvable conflict of emotive states, then that's just something that cannot be resolved. And the emotivist has no framework with which to say somebody is correct and somebody is incorrect. I will just accept that criticism. I do think that is a problem, or at least in the sense that it's very uncomfortable. It's not a nice fact, right? So I totally understand what you're saying. Is that this is not like yay, awesome, like great, like there's no objective ethics. Like it's not a nice thing. But I do think that the extent to which people think that it causes just unresolvable moral disputes is highly overblown. I think that's so it is a problem. In the sense that it's uncomfortable, no one wants this to be the case. It'd be great if there were such thing as ethics, but I don't think it's quite as much of a problem as people often make it out to be. But like, to save the time, I'm willing to just accept what you're saying, which is if you stipulate that there's just a conflict of emotions, like I'm not a moral realist, so of course I can't say that one of those is true or false.
But I guess my question, and I'm not trying to be too aggressive in terms of the line of questioning or anything, but I guess I want to just ask at a more personal level, does that uncomfortability that you just, that was the word that you just used, do you ever pause at that and wonder if it's a signpost pointing you in a different direction.
All the time, yeah, absolutely. Which is why I say that I remain broadly agnostic about this. I mean, for example, I'll give you another picture of something which I think is quite interesting and ties into the free will thing, actually, which is like, suppose that the reason that we have this, to take like Lewis's argument from desire, like the reason that we have these feelings about good and bad is because there is this thing called the good. And maybe that's the same thing as God, or maybe you're a materialist and you just think there is this thing called good. Because, by the way, materialists do that. They just posit that there is this thing called the good, right?
And this other thing called the universe, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you posit this thing called the soul. You know, like we all have our brute facts when it comes down to it. But suppose that we say that there is this thing called the good, right? There's a really interesting conception of what freedom is, where you can. I'm trying to think how to put this. So,
can I say really quick, just because I want to be clear, my brute fact is actually God.
Yeah.
Because I think that the existence of God actually then explains the soul without, now again, I can't go into the mechanism of that, but it at least logically follows that a mind can beget mind if you follow at the most basic level.
Is the soul the same thing as the mind to you?
I mean, that's also a really good question. I think that I don't know exactly how the pieces work, but there are a few pieces inside of the self that people, even in Christianity and without kind of argue about, spirit, soul, mind, will, emotions, like how do these different components, like I actually don't know exactly the answer to that question. But I didn't mean to derail where you were going with that. I just wanted to say really quick that we all do have brute facts. I agree. I guess that I would say that the single brute fact of God then solves you don't have to make the universe a brute fact, the soul a brute fact, love a brute fact, morality a brute fact, reason a brute fact. You can kind of have one brute fact that's sort of upstream from those other ones without having to independently land at those as your final place. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, like there are less brute facts that you have to swallow if you just swallow the existence of God. Because in a way, God just is all of those brute facts that the atheist has, just bundled into one. So the atheist sort of has the brute fact of reason, the brute fact of the good, the brute fact of the universe and whatever caused it, and the Christian kind of bundles them all together and just goes sort of, squishes them into a singularity of sorts and says, this is my brute fact, which is God. But depending on how you conceive of God, if God is just a sort of amalgamation of all of these brute facts, then I don't know, maybe you've kind of got the same number of brute facts. They're just sort of all squished together. You know what I mean?
I think understanding God as a personal being is a really big deal, because maybe we don't agree here, but I would argue that we are personal beings, each of us. And I think, honestly, that mankind, like humans, like the question of what is a human is one of the biggest indicators toward whether or not there is a God, because and you even said at the start, you're like, I don't want to just call us moist robots or whatever. Like you acknowledge sort of the exceptionalism of us in relation to the rest of sorry, I'm smuggling in language creation, the rest of the things that are, so I would just say it's like, man, I have this profound experience of love. I think you do as well in your life. I have this experience of, like we said, kind of Cartesian, just awareness of the self. Sort of, I'm thinking. I can't deny that, because what you were saying about that, and each of those things are just at the most intuitive, basic level, before us. And all that I'm saying is the God hypothesis, if you will. It's not just I'm working upstream and cramming them into this thing that I'm then calling God. It's basically, I would argue, more logical to say that mind begets mind than that matter begets mind, or that love begets love than to say that matter begets love. Like all these different areas, morality, love, rationality. I'm saying it actually is more logical to start with God and then to kind of go downstream, rather than like, it's not the only way I can see not having some kind of a patchwork quilt philosophy where there's like different pieces that are getting kind of placed together in amalgamation is just accepting the single brute fact of God. If you kind of follow what I mean.
I totally understand what you mean. By the way that you just contrasted mind begetting mind with matter begetting mind. One important thing to qualify here is that, of course, if God is the creator of the material universe, then you have to posit that mind creates matter.
Of course.
Which might seem like easier to do because the mind is the mind. It can choose to do stuff. But if you're talking about like the substances, I mean, the problem with materialism begetting consciousness is that atoms don't seem to be the kind of thing that consciousness is. Consciousness is like a different substance. It's a different kind of thing. Like, it doesn't matter how many atoms you put together, you don't get a mind. But there is the same problem in reverse that people often don't kind of clock or think about, which is that you can take as much mind, like disembodied mind, as you want and put it together, and you don't get matter. So there must be some way, even for the Christian, that this matter-mind divide can just be bridged. And you might think, well, God just has the power to do that. That might be true, but there still must be a mechanism by which it happens. And there's not, if in principle it's possible for there to be a bridge between a causal bridge, that is, between mind and matter, I don't think it's necessarily obvious which way that would have to go, right? So I just think it's worth sort of pointing that out. But as I say this, especially aware of the channel that I'm on and the kind of viewership that it has, I want to emphasize that I'm not saying this because I do believe that the mind is emergent of material. I just want people to be aware that there are so many options to discover here and to talk about here. And I hope it becomes clear that, like, I have my hunches. Like, I don't think free will exists. I think I'm an ethical emotivist, but broadly I'm agnostic and fascinated by the options that are available to us.